Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati podcast, where we dive into how emerging technologies will impact the world and your bank account. I'm Trent Fowler, and tonight I'm doing a solo episode. But as you know, my co-host Thomas Fry and I are futurists, keynote speakers, and consultants with decades of experience in analyzing trends and communicating new developments to audiences across the world. Reach out to us at damn it. I'll take it from the top. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati podcast, where we dive into how emerging technologies will impact the world and your bank account. I'm Trent Fowler, and tonight I'm doing a rare solo episode. But as you know, my co-host Thomas Fry and I are futurists, keynote speakers, and consultants with decades of experience in analyzing trends and communicating new developments to audiences across the world. Reach out to us at futuratipodcast.com/contact-futurati if you'd like to hire us for consulting, to speak at your event, or to advertise on our podcast. Now, I just wrapped up a remarkable episode with a legal scholar named Allan McCay, Dr. Allan McCay. He is based in Australia, and his whole professional focus these days is on the intersection of philosophy and law and emerging technology. So he spends a lot of time thinking about things like neurotechnology, for example, brain-computer interfaces, monitoring devices, devices that boost your ability to pay attention to things or could shave the peaks and valleys off your emotions, and how we should think about those legally. So, for example, we have questions like, are psychopaths morally culpable for their behavior? And does that change if we have the ability to inject a probe into their brain that changes the way that their minds work, that their neural architecture is structured, and therefore could boost their moral agency? Is that a thing that we should be playing with, and under what conditions should we do so? Obviously, there are any number of really serious ethical questions which surround such an endeavor. For example, what may begin as a technology to help impulsive people control their anger so they don't commit violent assault could, with some modifications and some spread, become a technology for making sure that nobody ever gets out of hand at a political protest. And eventually you have a population of people that just aren't capable of getting really angry over the gravest injustices. So this is very rich ground. It reminds me a lot of Ramez Nam's trilogy Nexus, which covers some of the same territory. I recommend you read that if you're into this kind of thing. But before you do, please check out this episode, number 106, with Allan McCay. Tonight, I'm joined by Dr. Allan McCay. Allan is Deputy Director of the Sydney Institute of Criminology and an academic fellow at the University of Sydney's Law School. He coordinates the legal research units at the Sydney Law School and lectures in criminal law. Named as one of the most influential lawyers of 2021 for his work on neurotechnology, he is a member of the management committee of the Julius Stone Institute of Jurisprudence at the University of Sydney, an affiliate member of the Center for Agency, Values, and Ethics at Macquarie University, and a member of the Minding Rights Network, an international group who are working on human rights challenges related to emerging technologies. If you enjoy this interview, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. And don't forget to check out our website, futuratipodcast.com. Allan, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for the invitation.
Let's hear a little bit about your background, your interests, and what brought you to working on the problems that you work on today.
My background's in law. I used to be a commercial litigator, the big commercial firm, and then I moved into teaching law. And initially, I got interested in behavioral genetics and sentencing. I got a philosophical interest in the free will problem, and that was a way of studying something a bit related to the philosophical problem of free will in a law school. And then, so I did my PhD in that, and then I started to do some work on cases involving neuroscience. So cases where perhaps an offender is being sentenced and they've got an issue with a brain abnormality, maybe some issue with their frontal cortex or something like that, and that's raised as a mitigating factor in sentencing. And so I started working on that, and then maybe about 5 years ago I started to get interested in neurotechnology brain-computer interfaces and that sort of thing. And so I've been working on that for the past, sort of 4 or 5 years. And as a result of that, the Law Society of England and Wales, they asked me to write a report on neurotechnology and the law and the legal profession. And that's really how I came to be doing that.
That's fascinating. Have you always had an interest in those philosophical issues and how they redound upon the law?
Yeah, well, since the end of my undergraduate degree, so I did some philosophical units in that. So I did a course called Scottish Legal Thought and the Enlightenment, but it was actually the criminology course that I did as an undergraduate that introduced me to the free will problem. And so it was actually through criminology that I initially became interested in the free will problem. And I did, I left it for a while. I was a commercial litigator, but I have come back to it. And along with one of my American colleagues, actually, Michael Seville at this law school, we wrote a edited book on free will and the law. So we published that. So I've still got the philosophical interest in free will, and I'll no doubt come back to it again.
Yeah. So where do you come down on that? We have free will. We don't have free will. What's your answer?
It's very, I find it a very difficult question. The more I study it, the more I realize why the debate's gone on so long. And I've seen very good arguments that make me think that we can't have free will, or we can't be responsible. We can't deserve punishment for our wrongs or reward for the good things we do. But then it's very hard to reconcile that with the way I live my life. And so I think in my work, I do presuppose a kind of free will, but I'm sympathetic to the skeptical arguments. And I just see it as a very difficult problem that I haven't resolved. And I don't think others have, although some claim to. But
yeah, I know how you feel. So when I was in college, I officially majored in psychology, but I was also very interested in neuroscience and philosophy. So I took a lot of classes in those things. And I came down in sort of the same situation where I could read these arguments about how we don't have free will. And yet at almost every moment, I feel myself making choices. And it seems like that first person introspective data does count for something, surely. I mean, where does that feeling arise from if not from some kind of ability to choose between different alternatives?
That's right. Yeah, there's the first person introspective data, and then there's also the evaluations of others and that sort of thing. And it's just hard to shake this this belief in free will that I have, but goes for a while just after I've read Galen Strawson or some persuasive philosopher who says we don't have it, but it doesn't last for long.
Then I choose between a sandwich or a chicken thigh, and then it's okay, well, here we are once again believing in free will.
It's up to me. It's up to me.
So what are some of the ways in which that interacts with legal questions?
So the way the thing I've been interested in is primarily the justification of punishment. So like many jurisdictions around the world, Australia has a mixed justification of punishment. So some of the reasons that are stated as justifications of punishment are consequentialist. So they're, aiming to protect the community, to deter people, to rehabilitate them, to incapacitate the dangerous. But then there's also a retributive justification. So the idea is that offenders are supposed to get what they deserve for the moral culpability that they displayed in committing the offense. And I think it's that retributive justification that is problematic if there's no free will. The consequentialist, community protection oriented justifications of punishment don't seem so reliant on people having free will, but it's hard to see how people can really deserve to be punished if they don't have free will in some kind of meaningful sense.
I've always wondered if maybe I couldn't make a paper out of the claim that an individual's and a society more generally's views on their personal efficacy feed back into the matrix of causes that ultimately determine their behavior. So even if maybe there's not some neurological basis for free will, the mere fact that you believe yourself to be capable of this or that ultimately influences which path you take in a way that's very consequential. So maybe we should believe in free will, even if we have no great justification for it, which is not a satisfying answer, but I could probably get a paper out of that if I really tried.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm sympathetic to the idea of illusionism. I mean, there's a philosopher, Saul Smilansky, he thinks that there's a sense in which nobody deserves any punishment, but there's also a kind of sense in which they do, and that's partly illusory, but he's okay with that. He thinks it's largely beneficial. And yeah, it may well be, even if we don't have free will, there's something beneficial about believing it, even if it's false. So yeah, I'm sympathetic to that view.
So let's get into neurotechnology. I originally found you because you had published this blockbuster report on neurotechnology and the law. That's a major recent research interest of yours. So I guess, first of all, I don't know if this is necessary, but let's go ahead and define neurotechnology, because sometimes words like this can be a little slippery. And then let's get right into the meat of the report.
Okay, so the definition is actually, it is quite tricky. So I think of it as technologies that read from the brain, take data from the brain, or directly interact with it. And so, for example, something like a brain-computer interface that reads neuroactivity and allows a person to control a device or a cursor or something like that. That would be a form of neurotechnology that reads from the brain. And then perhaps some kind of electrical stimulation to address Parkinson's or avert an epileptic fit that might be coming or something like that. That involves directly interacting with the brain in a kind of direct way, rather than a way that's, say, mediated through the senses.
That's yeah, the directness seems important for the definition, because as you were saying that, I was thinking like, well, I mean, wouldn't language kind of count? I mean, I can say words and impact your nervous system in a way that you don't have a lot of control over. And if I'm really, really good at convincing people to do stuff, arguably there's almost a kind of neurotech angle to that. But we need that distinction, and I think the directness is a really good hook to hang that hat on.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think the problem is, of course, many things interact with, your language is interacting with my brain, but it's to nail it down to there's this kind of practical problem of what to do about something. And there's various technologies being developed and need to think about what to do about them. So it's maybe something of a kind of pragmatic definition, of this kind of directness is just useful in trying to decide what to do about neurotechnology.
So I have a background in neuroscience, and I do machine learning and data science now. So I'm not super up on neurotech, but it is an interest of mine, and it's something that I kind of passively follow. And it doesn't seem to me like the technology is far enough along yet for there to be serious legal questions. Are you just trying to get out in front of it, or do you disagree with that assessment? Do you think that actually a company like Neuralink is on the cusp of probing kind of serious ethical questions that need to have a jurisprudential framework around them now?
So I'm trying to get ahead of the game, I think, but so there are at the moment. So the way I actually initially got into it was when I first heard, I first started thinking about brain-computer interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, I lecture in criminal law, so I was teaching the criminal law class when I first started thinking about it. And then we have this distinction between the actus reus and the mens rea. So the mens rea is the guilty mind, and the actus reus is the criminal act, or it could be an omission, or occasionally it's a status, but usually it's an act, so like throwing a punch or something like that. Now, I imagine somebody committing an offense by way of brain-computer interface. And I actually looked at the revenge porn offense initially, so imagine somebody assembling intimate images of another person without their consent, knowing that they don't consent, and then uploading it and doing it all by way of mental acts. So they imagine a hand wave or something, and that moves the cursor right, and they imagine kicking a football, and that selects, and they assemble the images, put them up on social media that way. So the prosecution have got to prove beyond reasonable doubt that the defendant has performed the actus reus. But there's something unusual or non-standard about this actus reus, because it doesn't involve the muscle system, and it's almost like there's this kind of distinction between the guilty mind and the criminal act that is comes under a bit of pressure, because they, in a sense, a lot of them seem to be the things that the defendant did seem to be mental. And so I guess what one thing that occurred to me is, well, there are a number of people now that are interacting with the world by way of brain-computer interfaces. So some people are people locked in syndrome, and they're they're interacting with their devices or by way of brain-computer interface. And then there are others that are maybe using non-invasive headsets, and they're using it for gaming and that sort of thing. But it may well be that somebody has already committed an offense. There's enough people using it. It's hard to imagine that nobody's done anything wrong out of all the people that are using it. And so there's that was a kind of theoretical problem for the law that just seems a bit weird from the perspective of legal doctrine. I'm sure if somebody commits an offense by way of brain-computer interface, they won't say, well, you did it by brain-computer interface, so you're not guilty. They'll find a way of handling that. But anyway, I guess that's one thing that somebody could have committed an offense, or maybe engaged in some other legally significant action in a non-standard way that kind of presents some odd legal challenges. But when I got into it, I initially met an American professor at Columbia called Raphael Just, who's he's right on the cutting edge of neuroscience, neurotech. He's a professor at Columbia, and he's set up this organization called the Neuro Rights Foundation. And in conversations with him that I've had over the past few years, I've started to think that he's concerned about the human rights dimension to neurotechnology, and these kind of initial problems, like what's the actus reus in a criminal matter, they seem a bit dwarfed by some of the possible human rights implications that need to be thought through. And that's sort of, I'm not a human rights expert. I'm lecturing criminal law, but it makes me think that there are, there's something important to be considered here, and there's a debate to be had about what to do with this technology, given some possible human rights implications of it.
Well, what are some ways in which you foresee people using neurotechnology to hurt others or to violate rights?
Well, so the thing is, the human rights system that we have is largely set up after World War II, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the subsequent covenants. And at that time, they weren't really thinking about people having access to mental, to thoughts they weren't thinking about sort of direct kind of fine-grained stimulation. Okay, those ideas, there might have been some ideas about the effect of drugs and stuff on people, but not the kind of fine-grained possibilities for interfering with someone's perception or behavior that might be presented by neurotechnology. So I think the sort of immediate thing is the reading side, decoding. I don't know if you've seen the work of Jack Gallant at I think he's at UC Berkeley, where he I think uses fMRIs and shows people movies, and then decodes these hazy images of the movies that they can see from their neural activity.
Right.
And this kind of accessibility of the contents of someone's mind to others wasn't really envisaged. And so, okay, there's rights to privacy, but the Chileans have changed their constitution. I know there's a big constitutional change that failed a few weeks ago, but at the end of 2021, they did actually make a smaller change to their constitution that includes reference to mental privacy. And so that mental privacy thing, it might be encompassed in more generally in the human right to a private life, but maybe it isn't, and maybe there needs to be a bit more thinking about this new dimension to it. But then the subsequent one is more perhaps the bigger and more difficult thing, and the longer term issue is I think is manipulation. So of course there's all these debates about algorithmic manipulation and micro targeting and all that sort of thing.
Right.
But let's say some company has got access to data gleaned from social media and web searches and that sort of thing, and then they also add some data gleaned from some kind of neural interface, whether it be on the wrist or on the head or something, and then they start to know a lot, don't they? They start to know quite a lot about people, and with knowledge comes power, and the concern about manipulation just seems to get ramped up. And then if you add in some form of direct brain stimulation, so let's say Neurotech becomes a good way of treating depression or anxiety or Alzheimer's or something like that. Well, who's a bit depressed, who's a bit anxious, who's losing their memory a bit? It's a lot of people, isn't it, that have got something like that. And then, the way it would treat it would be some form of stimulation, some sort of reading and some kind of writing. And then the question is, well, there's this data that's being stored, and okay, you'd hope whoever runs the technology only uses it for the therapeutic purpose, but maybe not. Maybe they use it for some other commercial purpose or some kind of political purpose. And I initially started, that's an interesting question. What's the actus reus? But it sort of seems to get a bit dwarfed by these, or a bit sort of it seems less significant related to these other concerns that are a bit more distant, but they're worth thinking about now. I mean, the senator from that was instrumental in sort of pushing the constitutional change through in Chile is Senator Girardi, and he made the point that we're a bit slow to regulate social media, and it kind of cost us because there's now some problems. It's not quite clear what to do about them. It seems to have made some issues in the political process and stuff, and the horse is bolted.
Yeah.
And so the idea is to kind of get on the front foot. And so my report for the Law Society, what I wanted to do was bring it to the attention of lawyers, because most lawyers don't know anything about it. They know about AI, and there's a lot of consideration of AI and how it might affect legal practice and some of the legal issues that clients might have. There's sort of an awareness of that, but the neurotech thing isn't. And so the Law Society of England and Wales and I wanted to open this up so lawyers start thinking about this, and maybe thinking about law reform and that sort of thing.
Hello, this is Trent Fowler, co-host of the Futurati podcast. One of the most common pieces of marketing advice I've come across is to know your audience and give them what they want. One difficulty in podcasting is that it's actually pretty hard to do this. None of the major platforms give us any way to reach out to you, our listeners, to find out what you enjoy about the Futurati podcast and what you'd like to see done differently. So we've decided to record this commercial and ask you directly to reach out to us. Head over to futuratipodcast.com, go to the contact page, and drop us a line. Tell us about your favorite and least favorite episodes, what you'd like to see us cover in the future, and anything else you want us to know. We produce this show for you, and we want your advice so we can make it even better. Thank you. So, to what extent do you think that some of this has to come down to cultural norms? This is an issue that I've been kind of kicking around for a while, especially with podcast guests, because you mentioned the data question, the social media question, and that's what sparked this train of thought for me. Because for 10 or 15 years, for as long as social media has existed, people have just spewed this endless stream of data and largely not cared. And even after some of the privacy concerns have come to light, many people still don't care. And so there's sort of this question of, well, I mean, did Facebook really do anything wrong if they gave the data out anyway? And everybody kind of knew that there were these problems. And I mean, suppose the next iteration of a social media company has this big banner that says, like, we will use your data to target you politically for certain messages, and people still use it anyway. It's like, well, it's hard for me to assign culpability for them, even if I don't like the things that they're doing. So I feel my current position here in September of 2022 is just that, maybe there's technological frameworks, maybe there's legal or regulatory frameworks, but a lot of it just has to come down to culture. I think people have to care more about these things, and they have to understand the ways in which social media can be used against them, the ways in which it can be used profitably for them, and choose more of the latter than the former. Some of it's just education and practice.
Yeah, so I did actually make this point or a similar point in my report. I said, well, there's a new technology, things could go a bit wrong, and one tool to try and maximize the benefit and minimize the downside might be law. But absolutely, it's not the only tool. And this is a kind of policy decision that involves people with political skills, getting the tech companies on side, and various other non-legal approaches. It's just you shouldn't put everything down to the law to make it go right. And so I broadly agree with your points. So education and other forms of engagement that are non-legal could be quite important. I mean, like, I think education's a good point, so as a sort of push around the world to get engineers and engineering training to have a bit more engagement with ethics, and maybe that could help prevent some unintended consequences. I mean, still people might act badly, and probably the ethics training won't really stop that, but maybe some people that don't intend to act badly might benefit from some kind of ethical reflection in their engineering degree, and that might be helpful in part of the way of addressing some of the issues alongside the law and alongside other things.
Well, ethics has, it seems to me anyway, to have been making its way into engineering curricula at a greater clip. And I'm not at all convinced they have the right ethical framework, but it is encouraging that they're at least considering the ethical dimensions of the tech that they're building and the ways in which it might go wrong, and the ways in which it could be safeguarded.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It seems to only be a good thing. I mean, again, you can't put too much stock in it. It's not going to, maybe that on its own is not enough. My feeling is there's got to be, so the people who are developing neurotech, they've really got to have this, be thinking about regulation that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
Because what's going to happen is at some point there will be more regulation about brain data and that sort of thing. Maybe it'll be treated differently from other forms of health data and that sort of thing. But it'd be useful for neurotech companies now to take a kind of anticipatory stance and think, well, probably there's some kind of regulations coming, and then if they know that, then it might shape some of their decisions and put the discussions about the ethical framework and stuff a bit up the list. So the law might kind of have a role in pushing it up the priority list a little bit, given that the ethical framework might give some guide to the way the law ultimately ends up. The law is not just ethics sort of translated into a different form. There's private interests and all that's, political gain, all that sort of thing, but maybe it's part of it. And, so it's good for probably for the tech companies to be put on notice that something's coming, and they should try and hopefully do something that'll be compliant with whatever comes in.
So we've said that the law can't bear the full brunt of managing this technology safely and ethically. That having been said, you must have thought in broad strokes about the kind of legal framework you'd like to see emerge. So can you walk us through that briefly?
I'm part of a group called the Minding Rights Network, which is it's a thing that's we're scholars from various different parts of the world. We are considering the what might need to change within human rights context and that kind of thing. And so we're still, to be quite honest, we're still thinking about it. There's some proposals up about whether there should be new rights. So, for example, a right to mental privacy, and that's a possibility. But as far as I'm concerned, we're not, we haven't resolved the nature of the framework that's required. We're all in agreement that something needs to be done, but we haven't agreed what what it is. I mean, here's something. So, like, maybe some things are more easier to think about. I mean, like, say for example, consumer neurotech. So neurotech without a therapeutic aim. So some kind of attention monitoring neurotech or something for playing games or something like that. Then, you've got on the one hand, you in America have got the FDA approval for the therapeutic side, and then just some form of consumer regulation for the non-therapeutic neurotech. Probably that standard consumer form of regulation is probably not fit for purpose, given the kind of sensitivity of brain data, and probably there needs to be some kind of different form of regulation. Maybe even some non-therapeutic devices might even need to go through some regulatory approval process rather than just going straight to market. There's things like that could be might need to be done.
So an FDA, but for things that impact your brain.
Yeah. So if you've got something that's supposed to make you pay attention for longer or something, some kind of stimulation device or something like that, even though it's not really therapeutic and it's not a medicine, it's not to address some kind of deficit, it's to kind of add to your enhance, there just needs to be a bit of maybe a good starting point would be some kind of consideration of the scope of the therapeutic regulation and the scope of the consumer device, consumer regulation, and consideration of whether there needs to be some kind of intermediate regulatory system for some kinds of devices or something like that. That might be a kind of a practical thing whilst the bigger question, do we need a right to mental integrity? Do we need a right to mental privacy, cognitive liberty? These are still being debated, but there might be some more modest tweaking of the regulatory framework, or even creation of a new regulatory body or something like that. That's worth considering.
That's fascinating. Are you enjoying this episode of the Futurati podcast? If so, please like it, give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. By far, the best way to help us grow is to spread the word on social media, which will expose our content to more people and help us continue to bring you interviews with world-leading experts in AI, quantum computing, cryptocurrencies, and so much more. Thank you in advance. Switching gears just a little bit, one bit about your biography that stuck out to me is that you're an affiliate member of the Center for Agency, Values, and Ethics. And I was just wondering if you could define those terms generally and discuss how they relate to each other. Maybe we can tie it back into Neurotech once you're done with that.
So this is another university. I'm at Sydney University right now. But there's another university that I have done some work for in the past, and I'm still an affiliate member, and it's Macquarie University. The Centre for Agency, Values and Ethics is largely something in the philosophy department, and I was primarily involved on the agency side. And so when we're talking about agency, we're talking about moral agency. And so there's a number of philosophers at Macquarie that were interested in issues of moral agency. So are psychopaths fully responsible for what they do? Could some kind of autism affect someone's moral agency? And then the Centre for Agency, Values and Ethics, they set up this project that's focused on moral agency in the context of the law. And so particularly in criminal law, but it's a bit broader than that. And they've got this thing called the Australian Neurolaw database, where we've identified cases where there's a neuroscience dimension to the case. And so, it's just, so as I say, the thing that I've been mainly focused in relation to that is the agency side, the moral agency, and not some. I mean, I suppose ethics is, of course, part of it, because we're also talking about punishment, and that's an ethical question.
That sounds suspiciously like the free will question we were kicking around earlier.
Yes. So I've worked with a very eminent philosopher called Jeanette Kennett, she's a professor there, and she sort of steers away from the free will problem. She thinks that's too hard, and she thinks that a better approach is just to kind of focus on particular issues of moral agency, which are of course related to the free will problem. But she sees it as the question is, are psychopaths responsible, or something like that, and take a more manageable kind of goal and try and just work out that one rather than the free will problem more generally. But it is, totally connected.
What are some ways in which neurotechnology would integrate with those considerations? I've heard of, and it's all super speculative, and it was even more speculative 10 years ago when I was reading about it, but moral enhancement. through technology. So perhaps making you more empathic or elevating your attention, I think, is a plausible mechanism by which you could do something like that. So just making you more aware of live options and better able to sift through them. Arguably, meditation is something that could get you there as well, but you could imagine a deep brain stimulation that's able to, cram 20 years of meditation and Zen practice directly into your brain in an afternoon. Have you given any thought to the ways in which the frontier of neurotechnology might enhance agency, might erode it, or the ways in which that would interact with ethics?
Yeah. I think you. I mean, so I'd thought about moral agency in the context of sentencing. So I'll give you an example related to that. So there's a device now for people with drug-resistant epilepsy that the drugs don't work well enough for in treating it. And it's a brain implant, and what it does is it identifies using a machine learning approach, it identifies the neural precursors to an epileptic fit. And when it sees the epileptic fit coming, it just acts to electrically stimulate to avert the fit. I co-edited another book called Neurointerventions and the Law Regulating Human Mental Capacity, and I did that a few years ago. And one of the chapters in that was from some philosophers, Gilbert and Dodds, and they envisaged Neurotech that works in a kind of similar way, but instead of the epileptic fit, it monitors the brain for signs of impulsive outburst, a sort of intermittent anger disorder type thing. And when it sees that, when it notices the brain going into that state, it stimulates to calm the person down. So this is hypothetical technology that is sort of extrapolating from some existing therapeutic technology for epilepsy. So, and they consider that in the criminal justice system, and they consider the ethics of it. And, they thought, well, let's say it's just an advisory system, so you've got a bit of neurotech and you're starting to get worked up, and maybe you haven't picked up on the signs yourself, but this thing just texts you and says, you're about to fly off the handle, take a walk or something like that. So you might think of that, and they sort of thought of that as kind of enhancing agency, because you now know a bit more about yourself as a moral agent and the situation you're in. And so that didn't seem to detract from moral agency. But then you imagine the automated version where it doesn't send you a text, it just takes matters into its own hands and just electrically stimulates you, perhaps unbeknownst to you, and so that you calm down. And there's some kind of sense in which the person might have lost a bit of autonomy there. They're not really okay. They're not causing trouble, but they're, there's some element of perhaps a loss of autonomy by just being sort of
sedated,
managed by this machine.
Right. And
so I've considered that in the context of sentencing law. So let's say I'm acting for you in this state, and you're on the edge of going to jail. You've assaulted someone. You might go to jail, you might not. You're just kind of on the edge. And so what I might say is, look, so you go and see Professor X, and the professor says, well, get the brain implant, and that will manage your impulsive outbursts. And then I go down to the court and say, look, don't send my client to jail. He's had this issue with impulsivity, but fortunately it's now dealt with. He's got this brain implant. He's under the care of Professor Smith and sees them once every 3 weeks or something. Just make an order You already do ankle bracelets, you do electronic
Right.
monitoring. It's just a bit more, you just make it a sort of souped up electronic monitoring order and say, give him an intensive corrections order so he just stays at home and goes about his life without going to jail. And the condition of it, he's got to keep this thing going for the next 2 years for the duration of the sentence. I can't see anything in any reason in law why that can't happen. The technology is not there yet, but I think it could come. It doesn't seem a million miles. If they can do it with the epilepsy, they can probably do it with the impulsivity.
Mm-hmm.
But then, do we want that? Because if you stop and think, and what's happening here, so the judge is making an order that you have this device that monitors your brain 24/7 using an automated decision-making process, decides when you need therapy.
Right. And then just turns it on.
Who runs it? Elon Musk or Facebook, or who's got, and then you've got hacking and possibilities and all that sort of stuff. And so there's something for the criminal justice system to think about. But anyway, that's the kind of ways in which perhaps moral agency might be enhanced. Walter Glannon is a Canadian philosopher, and he's keen to point out that neurotech can enhance people's moral agency, but it can also diminish it. It depends how it works.
Do you need a dynamic and knowledgeable speaker for an event? Thomas Fry and me, Trent Fowler, are both seasoned keynote speakers, able to converse on a wide array of topics to audiences of all sizes and skill levels. Go to the contact page at futuraudiopodcast.com to book Thomas or myself today, and let us apply our years of experience in public speaking to make your event a smashing success. Yeah, it seems to me like you'd want an extremely high bar for implanting somebody with something like that, where they just have this internal stimulus, this emotional flood that they can't control, and that spills over onto other people in ways that directly violates their autonomy. Like, you don't want to be regulating anger out of people, I don't think, because a lot of greatness comes from that passion. A lot of great entrepreneurs, for example, are well known to get into screaming fights with their vice presidents or the C-suite. Or Jeff Bezos famously would chew employees out in a way that was just biblical, not hurting anyone. But if you modulated that, it's not clear to me that you wouldn't also be trimming the highs off of insights or off of inspiration. I mean, it's
political protests and that sort of thing.
Quieting them down.
You have this kind of compliant population that never gets angry about anything. And so, there's this sort of social and personal reason to think that, let's not rush into it. Let's at least think about this first, whether it's a good idea. Absolutely. But the point is that the thing is, it's not really being mandated. So it's just, I just say to you, what, you might go to jail. It's not nice. It's a nasty place. You can have the brain. It's up to you. It'll make my plea and mitigation go a lot easier. And you might think, yeah, God, I don't want to go to jail. And so it's kind of voluntary. I mean, you've got this coercive threat of jail on the one hand, but, so it wouldn't really require some kind of authoritarian change in the law for it to start to happen.
Right.
It's a viable possibility now, in my view.
So we're coming up on your hard stop at 45 minutes. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I think the main thing is that the neurotechnology thing is starting to take off. There's quite a lot of commercial interest in it, and I think the main thing to think of is other technologies that have taken off quickly, like social media, and then led to problems, and that might happen with neurotechnology. And so it's worth just addressing this now, because things are happening now, development's happening. That would be my point. So scholars, lawyers, law reformers, ethicists that might, have some interaction with companies. This should be thought of and perhaps acted fairly soon, but there needs to be some thinking first, but not for too long.
Think the right amount, but no longer. I think that's
exactly.
That's an excellent headline for the episode. Thanks so much for your perspective and your insight. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks for the invitation. Thank you.